Module 7 will discuss Concurrence Point 3, Selection of the Least Environmentally Damaging Practicable Alternative, or the LEDPA. We will start with an introduction to LEDPA, including what is a LEDPA and why the selection of an alternative is important to the proposed project. After we establish the basics of LEDPA, we will move through the steps occurring between Concurrence Point 2, 2A, and Concurrence Point 3 for processes 1 and 2. As we've discussed in previous modules, avoidance and minimization efforts occur throughout project development. Avoidance and minimization during the steps leading up to the Concurrence Point 3 meeting include reviewing all alternatives for any opportunities to further avoid or minimize impacts to the natural, human, or physical environments. In preparation for Concurrence Point 3, the potential for any on-site mitigation scenarios will be determined. The LEDPA, or the preferred alternative, is the best solution to the problem of satisfying the transportation need or needs while considering the valuable environmental and community resources. To select a LEDPA at Concurrence Point 3, we build on the purpose and need developed for the proposed action at Concurrence Point 1, the identification and thorough analysis of alternatives selected for detailed study at Concurrence Point 2, and decisions made on locations and lengths of any bridges at Concurrence Point 2A in order to determine the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative for the project. It's important to note that the LEDPA may not have been an agency's preferred alternative, but it becomes the preferred alternative for the purposes of NEPA. In the merger process, they are the same. Revisiting the project discussed previously in Concurrence Point 1 and Concurrence Point 2, 2A, the best solution chosen is shown here, which is similar to the original tip alignment. This alternative was chosen as it would have less impacts to the natural environment. As you can see, the longer alternatives would have resulted with more stream crossings and wetlands being impacted. The longer alternatives would have impacted the businesses and neighborhoods to a greater degree than the LEDPA and would be more expensive to construct. So why is the LEDPA so important to the merger process? Under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, for any proposed action that may affect waters of the U.S. and is not water dependent, there is a presumption that there is an alternative that has lesser aquatic impacts, informally known as the high ground or avoidance alternative. Considering this, the alternative that can be permitted is the one with the least impacts that is also considered to be practicable. So the project team is obligated to select a LEDPA that meets avoidance and minimization criteria for subsequent issuance of permits prior to construction. The underlying purpose of Concurrence Point 3 is to make a decision. Concurrence Point 3 is a major milestone in both the NEPA and permitting process. It should be noted that selection of the LEDPA or preferred alternative must also be done within the regulatory framework of each agency. This slide depicts a snapshot of the specific steps associated with moving forward from Concurrence Point 2, 2A through Concurrence Point 3 for Process 1. Process 2 will be discussed later in this module. Briefly, the steps occurring after Concurrence Point 2, 2A and leading up to Concurrence Point 3 are as follows. 1. A draft environmental document is prepared, reviewed, and issued by NCDOT in conjunction with FHWA. Public notification occurs in the form of advertising the draft document and the upcoming public hearing. 2. At the same time, a Section 404 permit application is prepared by NCDOT and reviewed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Public notification occurs in the form of advertising the Section 404 permit application and the upcoming public hearing. 3. Questions and concerns received during the environmental document review, Section 404 permit review, notification process, and from the public hearing will be resolved by NCDOT in conjunction with FHWA. 4. The Concurrence Point 3 meeting is held and the LEDPA is selected. For Process 1, the first step following Concurrence Point 2 and Concurrence Point 2A is Step 14, Preparation of the Environmental Assessment Draft Environmental Impact Statement. A decision on the type of environmental document will be made by NCDOT in conjunction with FHWA, with consideration to NEPA and Section 404 requirements. The required environmental document will be completed by NCDOT, and the identification of impacts will be made for each of the preliminary alternatives that are studied in detail. If applicable, the conceptual on-site mitigation options and proposal will be prepared at this step. Preliminary determinations about applicable federal, state, and local environmental statutes and regulations will also be reviewed for potential permit actions. Step 15 includes issuing the Draft Environmental Assessment Draft Environmental Impact Statement. NCDOT and FHWA will review the preliminary environmental document for adequacy as it relates to NEPA requirements. NCDOT will revise the environmental document based on these comments or consult with FHWA to resolve any issues prior to formally issuing the document. At the same time, NCDOT will also submit the 404 permit application to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This starts the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers public notice process. It also provides an avenue to identify on-site mitigation opportunities. Step 16 includes issuing the Notice of Availability and Section 404 public notice. NCDOT will issue a Notice of Availability, which sets forth where the environmental document is available for public and agency review and comment, and how long the review period lasts. Review period for a DEIS is 45 days and 30 days for an EA. At the same time, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will issue a Section 404 public notice if appropriate. NCDOT should consult with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and other interested parties to set the public hearing date. Once the date is set, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers should be immediately notified of location, time, and place. The NCDOT Human Environment section will publicize the public hearing. For Step 17, NCDOT will hold the corridor or combined public hearing. Project team members are encouraged to attend the hearing to fully understand the public concerns. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and other project team members will be invited to attend the public hearing. Step 18 includes the agency and public comment period. The public has an opportunity to submit written comments to NCDOT, FHWA, and/or the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers after the public hearing within the established comment period. Also, any agency and public comments on the environmental document should be submitted to FHWA and NCDOT, with the Section 404 public notice comments being submitted to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. These agencies will format their recommendation letters to identify which comments are pertinent to the selection of the LEDPA preferred alternative. NCDOT will address these comments prior to the selection of the LEDPA and distribute their responses within the information material for the Concurrence Point 3 meeting. Holding the post-hearing meeting is included in Step 19. Following the regulated comment period, NCDOT will review and summarize the comments received on the document. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will forward the comments on the Section 404 public notice for inclusion in the hearing summary. NCDOT will then hold a post-hearing meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to evaluate all substantive comments received and determine if any additional studies or changes are needed to properly address issues that have been raised. Any additional work or studies to resolve comments will be completed by NCDOT. At the Concurrence Point 3 meeting for Process 1, the project team's responsibility is to concur on the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative. For both new location and widening projects, Processes 1 and 2, preliminary design data for each alternative will be presented and all potential impacts will be delineated and verified. Some of the more pertinent information needed to discuss and select a LEDPA includes Environmental Features Map, Updated Preliminary Alternatives Impact Table, Substantive comments received from agencies and the public throughout the process, Completed and minimized preliminary designs with hydraulic recommendations from Concurrence Point 2A, overall avoidance and minimization efforts to date, and discussion of constructability constraints if known. Also, comments from the public are presented and considered at this time. Now we will review the steps required from Concurrence Point 2.2a to Concurrence Point 3 for Process 2. The steps for Process 2 are essentially the same steps as Process 1. Step 16 includes preparation of the EA-DEIS, the Conceptual Mitigation Proposal, and the Section 404 application. Step 17 includes issuing the EA-DEIS and submitting the Merger 404 application. This is a preliminary application that allows the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to initiate the public notice process. An updated final Section 404 application will be submitted at a later time. Step 18 includes publishing the Notice of Availability and Section 404 public notice. Step 19 includes holding the combined public hearing. Step 20 includes the agency and public comment period, and Step 21 includes the post-hearing meeting and resolving agency and public comments. The Concurrence Point 3 meeting for Process 2 is the same as for Process 1. Again, the agency should come to the meeting prepared and ready to make a decision. NCDOT will identify a preferred alternative that is a result of the post-hearing meeting. However, the LEDPA, if different from NCDOT's initially preferred alternative, will become the preferred alternative upon concurrence. Now, in conclusion, LEDPA preferred alternative is the best solution to the problem or satisfying the transportation need while avoiding and/or minimizing impacts to environmental and community resources. For Process 1, the LEDPA is the corridor. For Process 2, the LEDPA is the best fit project within the widening corridor.